Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the very blood you raised, and when it does, it cuts deeper than any wound. My name is Henry Wallace, and I'm 72 years old. For half a century, I poured every drop of sweat, every calloused hour, and every aching muscle into a piece of land I called home. To outsiders, it was just a farm, rows of corn, a weather-beaten red barn, and acres of soil that shifted with the seasons. But to me, it was the place I carved out of nothing when I returned from service at 22, a broken man with more dreams than dollars. The farm was more than land. It was my testament. Every fence post I hammered, every crop I nurtured, every storm I endured, it all bore my name. My wife, Margaret, used to say, "Henry, this land is your second heartbeat." And she was right. After she passed, the fields became my chapel. The silence of dawn, the rustle of wheat in the wind, the smell of rain soaking earth, those were my hymns. And then there was Daniel, my only son, my blood, my hope for the future. When he was little, I'd hoist him on my shoulders so he could see over the cornstalks, laughing as if the whole world belonged to us. I taught him to ride a tractor before he could ride a bike. I remember his small hands gripping the steering wheel, his face proud and stubborn, so much like mine at that age. I thought he loved this place too. I thought one day, when my back bent too far and my knees gave out, he'd step into the rows I had tilled and carry it forward. But life has a way of teaching you that love can rot when fed the wrong soil. Daniel grew restless as he aged. While I cherished the crack of dawn and the honest labor of the fields, he dreamed of city skylines, fast money, and easy comforts. He went to college, came back sharper, more polished, with a wife on his arm who never looked twice at the dirt beneath her heels. Laura, the kind of woman who wrinkled her nose when she stepped off the gravel driveway and muttered, "How do you live out here?" At first I tried to bridge the gap. I welcomed her, set extra plates at the table, even bought a new sofa when she sneered at the old one. But it was never enough. She made it clear the farm was backward, Henry was old-fashioned, and Daniel could do better. Daniel listened. Oh, he tried to hide it, but I saw the shift. Fewer visits to the barn, more time spent on his phone, in meetings, making connections. When I asked him once to help mend a fence, he sighed and said, "Dad, you don't get it. I can make more in an hour online than I would fixing fences all day." I laughed it off then, thinking it was youth talking, but deep down a chill crept into me. For the first time I wondered, what happens when a son no longer values the ground his father built beneath his feet? It started small. Little comments over dinner, Daniel suggesting I think about slowing down, Laura asking if I had ever considered downsizing to a place more appropriate for a man my age. They dressed it as concern, but I heard the undertones. "You're in the way." One night, I remember sitting at the head of the table, the same table where generations of sweat-stained hands once prayed over food, and hearing Daniel laugh. He was talking to Laura, not even looking at me, when he said, "Dad can't keep this up much longer. Sooner or later he'll have to pass it on." He said it like I was already gone. Like the farm wasn't mine anymore, just a piece of property waiting for him to claim. I clenched my fork until my knuckles whitened. My lips pressed tight, but I said nothing. Not yet. Because here's the truth about betrayal. It doesn't happen in one strike. It builds like a storm brewing over the horizon. A word here, a gesture there, until the skies turn black and you realize you've been standing in the open field all along. And in that moment, I felt the first rumble. But I also knew something Daniel didn't, something he'd forgotten, or perhaps never bothered to learn. The farm wasn't just a piece of land. It wasn't just dirt and crops. It was mine. My name was written in the soil, carved into the deed, inked in blood, and while he might have thought me too old, too weak, or too blind to see what was coming, he didn't know the strength that comes when a man has nothing left to lose but everything to defend. I stayed silent that night. I let him talk. I let her smirk. But inside, I felt the ground shifting. My son, my only son, was already planning a future where I didn't exist. And that was the beginning of the storm. After that dinner, the air in the house was never the same. Where once there had been the comfortable silence of family, now there was a low hum of tension, like the static before a storm breaks. I could feel it in the way Daniel spoke, the way Laura glanced at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Respect had drained from their eyes, replaced by something colder, calculation. You see, I had always believed a farm was more than soil and barns. It was a covenant between generations, between sweat and harvest, between a man and his family. But Laura never saw covenant, only currency. And Daniel, God help me, had begun to look at the farm through her eyes. It started with little remarks. Laura once walked past me while I was mending a plow, her heels clacking against the wooden porch. "Henry," she said with a smile that carried no warmth, "don't you think it's dangerous, you crawling under machines at your age? What if something happens? Wouldn't it be wiser to retire while you're ahead?" I wiped my hands on my overalls and looked her dead in the eye. "This land's kept me alive longer than any doctor ever could. Don't mistake age for weakness." She laughed, high and dismissive, and went back inside. But Daniel, he didn't laugh. He stayed quiet, which was worse. I knew then that seeds had been planted, and like weeds in the field, they were growing fast. The first confrontation came not long after. It was a Sunday evening after supper. Daniel lingered at the table while Laura cleared dishes with a heavy sigh, as if the act of lifting plates was beneath her. I poured myself coffee, waiting for the usual small talk about crops, weather, anything. Instead, Daniel leaned forward, clasping his hands like a man about to deliver news. "Dad," he began, his voice smoother than usual, "Laura and I have been talking. We think it's time you consider stepping back." I didn't move. "Stepping back from what?" "From the farm, from all of it. You've carried the weight long enough. You should be enjoying your twilight years, not breaking your back. You could sell this place, move somewhere comfortable. A condo in town, maybe." Laura chimed in, too sweetly. "You could play golf, travel, relax. Doesn't that sound nice?" I stared at my son, searching for the boy who used to race me to the edge of the field at sunrise. All I saw was a man who had traded mud on his boots for dollar signs in his eyes. "This farm isn't a burden, Daniel," I said finally. "It's my life. I'll rest when I'm buried in that soil, not before." Daniel's jaw tightened. He tried to smile, but it came out forced. "You can't hold on to it forever, Dad. Times are changing." I leaned back, my coffee untouched, my voice low but firm. "I know, but some things are worth holding on to until your last breath." After that, their pressure only grew bolder. I began to notice unfamiliar cars driving slowly along the road, men in pressed suits stepping out, taking long looks at the land before driving off. Once, a man knocked on the door asking if I'd be willing to discuss future opportunities for the property. When I asked how he even knew to come, he shifted uncomfortably and said, "Your son mentioned you might be ready to move on." That night, I confronted Daniel. "You been talking to developers behind my back?" I asked, my voice sharp as the crack of a whip. Daniel sighed, exasperated. "Dad, I'm trying to look out for us. Do you have any idea what this land is worth now? Millions? You could live like a king instead of breaking your body out here." "I'm already living like a king," I shot back. "This land is mine, my work, my sweat. It's not yours to peddle to men in suits." He raised his voice then, his temper flashing like it used to when he was a teenager. "You're being stubborn. Everyone sees it but you. You're too old to run this place." I stood, my hands braced on the table, staring him down. "Too old? Maybe. But old enough to know the difference between caring for family and cashing them out like cattle. Watch yourself, boy." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Laura hovered in the doorway, smirking as though she'd already won. Daniel, red-faced, muttered, "You'll thank me one day," and stormed out. But I didn't thank him. I sat alone in that kitchen, the clock ticking loud, my hands trembling, not from age, but from rage. Reflection settled in later that night as I walked the fields under the stars. The soil smelled of earth and sweat, the same as it had for 50 years. I bent down, picked up a clump of dirt, and let it crumble through my fingers. Too old to run this place? Maybe my body had slowed, but my spirit hadn't. And as I looked across the acres I had fought to keep through droughts, floods, and bank notices, one truth echoed in me louder than Daniel's insults. If he thought he could strip me of this land with a smile and a signature, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Because I had fought harder men than him to keep this farm, and I was ready to fight again. That was the night I realized this wasn't just a difference in vision, this wasn't just a father and son disagreeing, this was betrayal taking root. And roots, once they dig deep, are hard to pull. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with thunder. It creeps in quietly, slips under doors, and waits for you to notice when it's already too late. For weeks after that blow-up in the kitchen, Daniel kept his distance. He stopped asking me to sign things, stopped dropping little hints. At first, I thought maybe the confrontation had rattled him. Maybe he realized he'd crossed a line, but silence isn't always peace. It's often plotting. I found that out one morning when a letter arrived. Thick envelope, official-looking, with the county seal on it. My hands shook as I opened it, though I didn't know why. Inside were notices about a pending auction. My farm listed among the properties. My farm, the one I had spent 50 years paying off penny by penny, acre by acre. I read the words twice, then a third time, until the letters blurred. The auction was scheduled within the month. According to the papers, my consent had already been given. Only I had never signed a thing. I stormed into town, my boots heavy on the courthouse steps. At the clerk's desk, I slapped the letter down. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. The clerk, a woman I'd known for years, frowned as she looked it over. "Well, Mr. Wallace, it looks like your son filed paperwork to transfer the farm into a trust in his name, and with that he arranged the auction." My chest tightened. "But that's impossible. My name's still on the deed." She hesitated. "These documents, they include your signature." I stared down at the papers, at the neat black ink scrawled across the bottom. My name, my handwriting, except it wasn't. I knew every stroke of my own pen, and this wasn't mine. Daniel had forged it. For a moment, the courthouse spun around me. Betrayal wasn't an idea anymore, it was ink on paper. My son had stolen my name, my rights, my very identity, to sell the ground beneath my feet. That evening I drove straight to his house. Laura answered the door, smiling like a cat who had already eaten the canary. "Henry," she said sweetly, "we were wondering when you'd find out." "Where's Daniel?" I growled. He appeared in the hallway, casual as if I'd just stopped by for supper. "Dad, come in, let's talk." I refused to sit. "You forged my name." His jaw flexed, but his voice stayed smooth. I did what needed to be done. You're clinging to something that's killing you. This farm. It's worth millions, Dad. Do you even understand what that means for us? For me? For you, I snapped. Not us. You sold me out. You forged my damn name. Laura folded her arms, smug. Don't be so dramatic, Henry. It's not like you were going to use the money. You'd just waste it sitting out there in the dirt. My fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to roar, to shake sense into my boy, but instead I forced myself to breathe. Quiet rage burns hotter than loud anger. You think you're saving the family? I said slowly. You're selling its soul. Daniel's mask slipped then, frustration flaring in his eyes. You don't get it. You're old. You don't understand how the world works anymore. This is my chance to secure a future, and I won't let you ruin it. He actually believed that. Believed stealing from his father was securing a future. I turned to leave, my voice cold as the night air. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, I walked the empty halls of my farmhouse, every board creaking like a reminder of what I stood to lose. I thought of Margaret, of how she used to stroke my hand when the bank came knocking, whispering, "We'll get through it, Henry." We always did, but this wasn't a bank. This was my own son. The weight of it nearly crushed me. My boy had chosen greed over blood, money over honor. For a while, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, staring at the auction letter, wondering if this was how it ended, if 50 years of work could be erased by a single betrayal. Then, almost without thinking, I rose and went to the old safe in the corner. My fingers spun the dial, rusty with age, until the lock clicked open. Inside, wrapped in a faded envelope, was the deed, the original deed. I pulled it out, the paper yellowed but strong. My name, Henry Wallace, bold and clear, mine, not Daniel's, not anyone else's. A slow fire began to kindle in me, hotter than anger, steadier than grief. Daniel thought he had me beaten. He thought I was too old, too tired, too blind to catch him. But he was wrong. I wasn't finished. Not yet. That was the first time I smiled in weeks, because while Daniel thought he'd buried me under his lies, he'd forgotten one simple truth. I was still standing, and I still held the one thing he didn't know I had, the real deed. I sat at that kitchen table until the sun came up, the deed spread out before me like a shield. My fingers traced the ink, the notary's stamp, the signature that was mine and mine alone. 50 years of labor pressed into paper. 50 years Daniel couldn't erase with the forged scrawl. The anger that had burned through me the night before settled into something sharper. Resolve. Anger clouds a man's judgment, but resolve, that steadies his hands. I had knocked down plenty of times in life, by drought, by debt, by storms that tore through crops I'd spent months nurturing. Each time I got back up, this would be no different. But unlike hail or hunger, this storm had a face, my son's face. I didn't rush, that was the first rule. A farmer knows better than anyone that you don't reap the harvest the day you plant the seed. Timing matters. Patience matters. If I came at Daniel too soon, I'd only tip my hand and give him a chance to cover his tracks. So I played along. The next time Daniel came by the house, swagger in his step like he already owned the place, I poured him coffee. "Heard you've been busy," I said, keeping my voice even. He smirked. "Just making arrangements. You'll thank me one day when you're not breaking your back out here." I smiled thinly, taking a sip from my mug. "Maybe you're right, son. Maybe it is time I start thinking about the future." The satisfaction on his face was almost unbearable, but I held steady. Let him think he was winning. That same week, I drove into town to meet with my lawyer, an old friend named Carter who'd handled my property papers for decades. I laid the forged documents on his desk alongside the original deed. "Looks like my son's been playing games," I said. Carter adjusted his glasses, scanning the papers. His brow furrowed. "This is bad, Henry, real bad. If you hadn't kept this original deed locked away, he might have pulled it off. But you did, and that means the sale has no legs to stand on. You still own this land outright." Relief swept over me, but Carter raised a cautioning hand. "Don't celebrate yet. If Daniel's bold enough to forge your name once, he won't back down easy. He'll push harder. You need to be ready." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of his words. Ready? I'd been ready my whole life. In the evenings, I walked the fields, letting the cool air steady me. Each furrow of soil reminded me why I had to fight smart. This wasn't just about keeping land. It was about protecting dignity, history, Margaret's memory. It was about teaching my son that betrayal has consequences. Quietly, I began making arrangements. Carter helped me file a formal notice with the county clerk, affirming my sole ownership and flagging the forged signature. That ensured no sale or auction could move forward without my direct consent. But I didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. I wanted him to believe his plan was still alive. I wanted him to walk into that auction day with his head high and his smile smug, so that when I dropped the truth in front of everyone, it would hit harder than any private scolding ever could. Laura stopped by a few times, each visit dripping with false kindness. She'd comment on the house, the furniture, the opportunities waiting for me if I sold. One afternoon, she set a glossy brochure on the counter for a retirement condo in town. "Just think, Henry," she cooed. "No more creaky stairs, no more lonely nights. You could have neighbors your age, activities, security. Isn't that better than rattling around out here all alone?" I picked up the brochure, flipped it once, then tossed it back on the counter. "This farm isn't lonely, Laura. It's alive, every board, every field, every sunrise. It's more company than you'll ever understand." Her smile faltered, but she covered it quickly. "Well, suit yourself, but Daniel and I are just looking out for you." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "Funny, it doesn't feel like looking out. Feels more like looking in, with dollar signs in your eyes." She left in a huff, muttering something about stubborn old men. I watched her drive away, the brochure still lying there like trash on my counter. As the weeks ticked by, I played the part of the weary father on the edge of surrender. I let Daniel believe I was softening, let him see me sit a little longer in my chair, move a little slower through the fields. He mistook endurance for weakness. That was fine by me, because when the day came, he would learn the truth. Not just that I still owned the farm, not just that his plan was built on lies, but that his father, the man he thought was too old, too stubborn, too worn, still had fight left in him, more fight than he'd ever known. And I intended to let him walk right into that revelation, blind and proud, with the whole town watching. That was the moment my grief hardened into strategy. I wasn't just defending land anymore. I was setting the stage. For the first time since Margaret's passing, I felt alive. Because the harvest I was about to reap wasn't corn or wheat. It was justice. The weeks leading up to the auction felt like walking through a field of tinder in the middle of July. One wrong step, and everything would burst into flames. Daniel's confidence grew louder with each passing day. Where once he whispered about selling, now he spoke openly, strutting around like the deal was already signed and sealed. He told neighbors, bragged to old family friends, even hinted at what he planned to buy once the money cleared. "New house in the city," I overheard him telling a cousin at church one Sunday. maybe even a lake place. Dad's farm will set us up for life." The cousin glanced at me, clearly uncomfortable. I said nothing, just shook his hand and walked on, my jaw tight, because that's what Daniel never understood. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the rope you hand a man and he doesn't realize he's tying his own noose. The first public clash came in town. I was at the feed store, loading sacks into the truck, when I heard Daniel's voice carrying across the parking lot. He was leaning against his shiny SUV, talking to a group of men in suits, developers, no doubt. He waved at the fields in the distance as if they already belonged to him. "This land will be cleared by fall," he boasted. "We're talking luxury homes, a shopping center, maybe even a golf course." I froze, a 50-pound sack of seed in my arms. Luxury homes, a golf course, on my soil. One of the men noticed me and nodded politely, but Daniel didn't stop. He glanced over, smirked, and said loud enough for me to hear, "Dad's just holding on to the past, but once the auction clears, it's full steam ahead." I set the sack down hard, dust puffing up around my boots. My voice cut through the chatter like a whip. "You might want to check the deed before you go making promises you can't keep." The developers exchanged uneasy looks. Daniel's smile faltered for just a second, then returned, forced and tight. "Don't mind him," he told them. "He's sentimental, stuck in his ways." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "Stuck in my ways is what built this land. Don't you forget it." For a moment, the air was thick as summer heat. Daniel laughed, but it was hollow, and I saw the flicker of nerves behind his eyes. Still, he waved his friends off, and they climbed into their car. He leaned in close, his words sharp. "Don't embarrass yourself, Dad. The deal is happening whether you like it or not." I stared back, calm but unyielding. "Be careful, son. You're gambling with something that isn't yours to lose." Then I turned, climbed into my truck, and drove off, leaving him standing there with the weight of my words hanging over him. But Daniel didn't back down. If anything, he pushed harder. He moved equipment out of the barn, telling anyone who asked that he was preparing for transfer. He spoke to neighbors about redevelopment, as if he were already the owner. Laura fueled the fire, too. One afternoon, she stopped by unannounced, her heels clicking across my porch like they owned it. She carried a box of papers and slapped them onto my kitchen table. "Daniel's drawn up some transition plans," she said briskly. "It'll be easier if you cooperate. Everyone knows this land is worth more developed than planted." I didn't even look at the papers. "This land's value isn't measured in dollars, Laura. It's measured in the lives it's sustained, in the sweat it's absorbed. Something you wouldn't understand." She rolled her eyes. "You're being stubborn. You're forcing Daniel to clean up your mess when you could be enjoying your final years in peace." I stood slowly, letting my chair scrape against the floor. "My final years will be spent on this farm. And if Daniel wants to make a mess, he'll find I know how to clean one up." Her expression soured, but she gathered the papers and stormed out. The second major clash came at a town gathering, a community fundraiser in the church hall. Daniel, always one to seize an audience, stood with Laura at his side, announcing plans for new opportunities once the farm was sold. "Our town could use a facelift," he said proudly, "and once the Wallace property sells, we'll finally have the funds to make it happen." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some folks clapped politely, others frowned. All eyes turned to me, sitting quietly at the back. I rose slowly, every joint aching but my voice steady. "My farm isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." The room went dead silent. Daniel's face flushed red. "Dad, don't do this here." I met his glare. "You already did. You dragged this family's name into the street. So let me be clear. That farm isn't yours to sell, it's mine. And come auction day, the whole county will see it." Gasps broke out. Daniel sputtered, trying to regain control. "He doesn't know what he's saying. He's confused." "I've never been clearer in my life," I cut in. Laura tugged at his arm, whispering frantically, but the damage was done. The whole room had seen it. The fracture, the fight. As I drove home that night, the stars glittering above, I felt the weight of what was coming. The town knew, the developers knew, and Daniel knew I wasn't backing down. But still, he pressed forward, convinced he'd win. And that was fine by me, because the deeper he dug his hole, the sweeter it would be when I buried him in the truth. The day of the auction dawned gray and heavy, like the sky itself knew a reckoning was coming. I rose before the sun, as I always had, though there was no tractor to start, no field to plow. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the old deed one last time, its edges frayed but strong. My hands were steady now. No nerves, no doubt, just a farmer ready to face his harvest. When I pulled up to the county hall, the parking lot was crowded with shiny trucks and polished sedans. Developers, investors, curious neighbors. Word had spread like wildfire. Some came to bid. Others came to watch the spectacle of a son selling his father's legacy out from under him. Inside, the air buzzed with chatter. Men in tailored suits compared notes, flipping through folders. Laura stood near the front, radiant in her smugness, her eyes scanning the room like a queen surveying her kingdom. Daniel was in the center, laughing too loud, shaking hands, his chest puffed with pride. When he saw me walk in, his smile froze for just a heartbeat. Then he recovered, clapping me on the shoulder. "Dad, you came. That's good. You'll finally see this through." I nodded slowly. "Yes, son, I came to see it through." He smirked, mistaking my calm for surrender. The auctioneer, a man I'd known since he was a boy, stepped to the podium. He looked uneasy, glancing between me and Daniel, but cleared his throat and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we're here for the Wallace Farm, 200 acres of prime land, barns, equipment, and water rights included. Opening bids start at—" Daniel raised his hand first, almost ceremonious, as though to show the crowd he was in charge. Bidding began, voices calling out numbers, the price climbing fast. Every shout felt like a knife carving into me. My land, Margaret's land, reduced to numbers. But I waited. The auctioneer paused finally, clearing his throat again. "Before we continue, the seller must confirm his consent for the sale." The room hushed. All eyes turned to Daniel. He puffed his chest, started to rise, and that was when I stepped forward. "My name is Henry Wallace," I said, my voice carrying through the hall. "And this farm is not for sale." A ripple of gasps swept the crowd. The auctioneer froze, his gavel suspended mid-air. Daniel's head snapped toward me, his face draining of color. "Dad, what are you doing?" I reached into my coat and pulled out the old deed, holding it high. The paper shook slightly in my hands, but my voice did not. "This here is the original deed to the Wallace Farm, signed, sealed, and still bearing my name. No transfer was ever completed, no consent was ever given. Every so-called document you've seen was forged." The room erupted in whispers. Neighbors leaned in, developers frowned, eyes darting between me and Daniel. The auctioneer looked stricken. "Mr. Wallace, is this true?" I laid the deed on his podium. "As true as the dirt under your boots. This land is mine, and no one is selling it out from under me." Daniel lunged forward, his face red. "He's lying! That paper's old, outdated. I filed new documents." I turned to him slowly, meeting his frantic gaze with the calm weight of a man who's seen too many storms to flinch at thunder. You filed lies, and lies don't stand when the truth is laid bare. Laura's smugness cracked, her lips pressed tight, her eyes darting toward the door as if already planning their escape. The auctioneer studied the deed, then shook his head. Without Mr. Wallace's consent, this auction cannot proceed. I'm calling it off. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, echoing through the hall like a gunshot. Silence followed. Thick, stunned silence. Then, slowly, people began to murmur, some in disbelief, some in admiration. A neighbor clapped me on the back as he passed, whispering, "Good for you, Henry." Daniel, meanwhile, was unraveling. His voice rose, cracking with desperation. "You're ruining everything. Do you understand? This was our chance. My chance." "Our chance?" I repeated, my voice low but carrying. "No, son. This was your chance, to sell your father's blood, your mother's memory, your family's honor, and you did it without a shred of shame." He sputtered, words failing him. Laura tugged at his sleeve, hissing, "Daniel, stop. Let's go." But he shook her off, his fists clenched, his eyes wild. "You'll regret this, old man. You can't live forever. One way or another, this farm will be mine." I stepped closer, my voice cutting like a blade. "No, Daniel, it will never be yours. Not as long as you see it as money instead of home." As they stormed out, whispers followed them, sharp as knives. Neighbors shaking their heads, investors closing their folders, muttering about wasted time. The proud son who strutted into the hall left smaller than I'd ever seen him. I stayed behind, standing tall as people came to shake my hand, to clap me on the back. Not because I wanted their praise, but because it mattered that they'd seen. Betrayal loses its sting when the truth is dragged into the light. That evening I walked my fields under the fading sun, the soil soft beneath my boots. For the first time in months I felt peace settle in my bones. Daniel had tried to bury me with lies, but instead he buried himself in front of everyone. And all it took was the truth I'd held close, waiting for the right moment to harvest it. The day after the auction, the farm was quieter than I'd ever known it. No tractors running, no visitors at the gate, not even the birds seemed eager to sing. The silence wasn't heavy, though. It was clean, like the air after a storm has passed and left the earth rinsed fresh. I thought maybe Daniel would stay away, lick his wounds in private, but I should have known better. Betrayal doesn't retreat gracefully. It claws, desperate, refusing to admit it's been beaten. By afternoon his truck pulled up the gravel drive, dust swirling behind him. He slammed the door, stormed up to the porch, his fists tight, his face still blotched from humiliation. "You think you won something yesterday?" he barked before I even opened the screen door. "You embarrassed me. In front of everyone, you made me look like a fool." I stepped outside slowly, letting the door creak shut behind me. "You didn't need my help to look like a fool, son. You managed that all on your own." His face twisted. "This was our chance. Do you have any idea how much money we lost? Do you know what that could have done for me?" "For you," I repeated softly. "Not for us. Not for this family. Just you." Laura's car door opened then, and she stepped out, arms crossed, her expression as sharp as barbed wire. "Henry, you're being unreasonable. You're sitting on a gold mine while we struggle. Why can't you just hand it over and let us build a future?" I stared at her. "Struggle? With your brand-new SUV and your shopping bags piled high? Don't dress greed up as need. I've seen real struggle, and it doesn't wear perfume." Her cheeks flushed, but she stood firm. Daniel jumped in again, his voice rising. "You don't get it, Dad. The world's changed. Nobody cares about some run-down farm anymore. It's wasted here, rotting under your boots. You're too old to keep this up." You can't even see it." I stepped closer, the porch boards groaning under my weight. My voice dropped low, quiet but edged with steel. "I see more than you think. I see a son willing to sell his father like cattle at market. I see a man who traded loyalty for luxury. And I see a boy who forgot where he came from." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, cutting him off. "Listen to me, Daniel. You tried to bury me with lies. You forged my name. You dragged our family's honor through the mud. You made me the butt of whispers in this town. And for what? So you could buy yourself a lake house? So Laura could have fancier curtains? You didn't just betray me. You betrayed yourself." For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not shame exactly, but the sting of hearing the truth spoken plain. He looked away, jaw working, but said nothing. I straightened, the weight of 72 years steady in my bones. "You're not welcome here anymore, not on this land, not in this house. You've shown me what family means to you, and it isn't worth a damn. So, from this day forward, the farm passes to someone who does value it." Daniel's head snapped back to me, fury flaring. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've rewritten my will," I said evenly. "The farm will go to Emily." Emily, my granddaughter. Daniel's own daughter. Unlike him, she had spent summers at my side, barefoot in the rows, learning to mend fences, helping me harvest. She loved the land the way I once thought Daniel did. Daniel sputtered, choking on his anger. "You can't do that. She's just a kid." "She's more of a steward than you'll ever be," I cut in. "She'll protect what you tried to destroy. She'll remember where she came from." Laura scoffed, but her eyes betrayed her panic. Money slipping through her fingers, dreams of easy wealth dissolving. Daniel stepped forward, fists clenched. "You'll regret this. You'll die out here alone, and then what? Emily won't know what to do with it." I leaned in close, my words sharp enough to cut. "Better she learns with honesty than inherits with betrayal. I'd rather die in this soil knowing it's in her hands than live one more day watching you poison it." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Laura tugged his arm, her voice cold. "Let's go, Daniel. We're wasting our time here." He hesitated, staring at me, searching for some crack in my resolve. But there was none left. Only the man who had survived storms, debts, and now his own son's treachery. At last he turned and stalked back to the truck. Gravel spat under the tires as they sped down the drive, leaving nothing but dust and the sound of my heartbeat in their wake. I stood there for a long time, the evening light spilling over the fields. The barn stood tall, weathered but strong. The rows stretched out, patient and enduring. And I knew in that moment I had done what needed to be done. The farm was safe. My legacy was safe. And Daniel, well, he'd have to live with the truth he'd carved into his own name. Because betrayal may rise like weeds, but justice, if tended carefully, always takes root. The days after Daniel stormed away were quiet, almost eerily so. For years I had lived with the background noise of his footsteps, his questions, his presence, even if those things had grown sharper and more selfish with time. Now there was only the sound of the wind pushing through the corn stalks, the creak of the barn door in the breeze, and the steady rhythm of my own boots on the soil. But I didn't feel empty. I felt lighter. Betrayal leaves a scar, yes. It takes something from you that can never be fully returned. But sometimes, in the silence that follows, you realize you're still standing. You've weathered the storm, and though your heart is battered, your foundation remains. For me, that foundation was always this land. I walked the rows one morning, dew soaking the cuffs of my jeans, the sun rising pink over the horizon. The air smelled of earth, damp and alive. I paused by the oak tree at the edge of the field, the same tree where Margaret and I carved our initials 50 years ago, the bark scarred but still holding them close. I touched the letters, rough under my fingertips, and whispered, "We made it, Maggie. They tried, but we held on." And in that moment I felt her there, in the rustle of the leaves, in the strength of the soil beneath my boots. Word of what happened at the auction spread faster than any harvest rumor ever had. Folks stopped me at the store, at church, on the street. Some clapped my back, some shook my hand, and more than a few told me they'd never forget the look on Daniel's face when the truth dropped. But praise wasn't what I wanted. What mattered was that the farm was mine, still mine, and that everyone now knew it. Daniel didn't come around again. Not in days, not in weeks. I heard whispers about fights between him and Laura, about money troubles once the big sale crumbled to dust. But I didn't go looking for details. That was his path to walk now, and he'd chosen it. What I did focus on was Emily. My granddaughter came out more often after that day, slipping her small hands into mine as we walked the fields. She asked questions about planting, about soil, about how to tell when the wheat was ready. She listened in a way her father never had. One evening I watched her climb onto the tractor seat, her eyes wide with excitement, her laughter carrying over the fields, and for the first time in years I felt hope. Not the fragile kind, but the steady, growing kind, the kind that roots itself deep. I made arrangements quietly with Carter, my lawyer. The new will was clear. The farm would belong to Emily. Not Daniel, not Laura, not anyone else who might try to cash it out. To Emily. She was too young now, of course, but one day she'd inherit it, and by then she'd know it wasn't just land. It was a legacy. I sealed the papers and tucked them away, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For 50 years I'd fought storms, banks, and now betrayal, and still the farm endured. One night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, I thought back to the words I'd opened with. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. I'd learned that the hardest way. But I had also learned something else. Betrayal may cut deep, but truth cuts deeper. And when the truth is revealed, it doesn't just protect, it heals. Daniel may never forgive me, and I may never forgive him. That's the price we both pay, but I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was handing him the knife to cut me deeper. Now, when I wake each morning, I don't think of what was nearly lost. I think of what was saved. The soil under my boots, the barn standing tall, the fields stretching wide like an old friend's arms. And I think of Emily, her laughter, her questions, her small hands gripping the steering wheel of the tractor, just as Daniel's once had. Except this time, I know the farm will be loved, not sold. The sun was setting the other evening when I walked the fields one last time that day. The sky burned orange, shadows stretching long across the rows. I stopped in the middle, closed my eyes, and breathed it all in. The smell of earth, the sound of the wind, the memory of Margaret's hand in mine. And I thought, this is what it means to win. Not the applause, not the humiliation of those who wronged you. The win is simply this: knowing you protected what mattered most, and that no one, not even your own blood, could take it away. Betrayal may cut deeper than any wound, but nothing roots deeper than the soil you've tended with your own hands, and this land will always be mine.